This video marks the beginning of a look at every single game ever made for the Nintendo Entertainment System Zapper. Now we start with a game that was based on one of Nintendo's really old-fashioned arcade machines. Wild Gunman's original arcade incarnation was an electromechanical machine in a pre-arcade world. Based on the simple act of a Wild West gunfight, players would be face to face with a projected image of a real person in cowboy garb. Now players would have to fire at their foe before they did the same as the player, and a different video would be played if the player was successful or failed miserably. Wild Gunman's original arcade incarnation was an electromechanical machine in a pre-arcade world. Based on the simple act of a Wild West gunfight, players would be face to face with a projected image of a real person in cowboy garb. Players would have to fire at their foe before they did the same to the player, and a different video would be played if the player was successful or failed miserably. Nintendo are just fantastic at reviving old ideas using newer technology, and they were doing this even in the 80s, as the original Wild Gunman was resurrected in digital form as an early game to use the Japanese Famicom's beam gun before being added to the North American Nintendo Entertainment System's list of launch releases as one of the first games for the now iconic NES Zapper. Being an early Famicom game, Wild Gunman is presented very simplistically with three different game modes, with Game A, One Outlaw mode being the most famous. You're viewing the action in the first person as a shady gentleman strides over to the middle of the screen before staring at you intensely for a brief moment. When his eyes flash and the words "Fire" appear on the screen, you need to quickly shoot him down before he shoots you first. Wild Gunman is about how quick you can react. Before you're prompted to unload your weapon, you're given your opponent's reaction time in seconds. All you have to do is beat it. And this highlights a big problem with Wild Gunman as a home game, and that is there is no difficulty in having your zapper pointed at the screen, waiting for the fire prompt and just shooting. There's no aiming involved in this mode. As long as you shoot the screen, it will register a hit. What you're actually supposed to do is have your gun by your side. The beam gun, the Japanese Famicom's original incarnation of the NES Zapper, sometimes came with a holster belt for this very purpose. You're supposed to play this game like a gunslinger would, and shoot from the hip as quickly as possible. Due to the endless repetition of this mode, you'll very quickly get bored in the space of 5 minutes or so. Game B, Two Outlaws, is a little more interesting, as you'll have two foes to bring down. It's not quite as clear cut as that though, as each outlaw has different reaction times and you'll have to aim at each one depending on what side of the screen they're on. In some cases, one of the so-called outlaws won't even fire and you'll be penalised for gunning that one down. This mode is a lot more fun and there's a lot more skill involved. Quickly figuring out which outlaw is going to fire and in what order you need to shoot them is a much more enjoyable deviation on the standard Game A mode, although it is still pretty simple. The final mode, Game C, Gang, is a mode that's a simple shooting gallery. Enemies pop out of doors and windows of a saloon and you shoot at them. Simple as really. There's 5 hitboxes to aim and shoot at, and again it's very easy, but you'll grow tired of this mode before you die in game. Being one of the first lightgun games for the Famicom and NES, and an early game for the system in general, Wild Gunman is obviously simplistic, with gigantic hitboxes and a game mechanic that relies more on the player constraining themselves than any actual skill. But for such an early game, the outlaw sprites are pretty impressive and very reminiscent of the art style of the early Punch-Out arcade cabinet. On that note, the home console version of Wild Gunman had a life in the arcades, appearing as a game on one of Nintendo's PlayChoice 10 range of cabinets, where players had a certain amount of time to play the game before having to put more money in. Nintendo also had another line of NES to arcade conversions called Versus that added multiplayer functionality, and while there was a Versus Wild Gunman cabinet planned, it was never released. However, it did become forever immortalised in its brief cameo during the 2015 scenes of Back to the Future Part 2. Decent visuals, and Game B, Two Outlaws is actually quite a fun mode. Very repetitive with very little accuracy required. It would be unfair to be harsh to Wild Gunman. For its time, it's honestly not a bad game. It is just a very shallow one that doesn't hold up well today, but for a quick 10-minute blast, it's good old-fashioned fun. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this and want more, you can click this icon to subscribe, this icon to support me financially via Patreon, or these icons to watch more videos from my channel. Why not take a few seconds to answer the question of the week in the comments, or just let me know what you thought of this video. See you next week.